Hello everyone, I'm Kyle Glockner, and welcome to this bonus episode of FaceOff. For my first episode, I compared The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. I was able to get my point across and still hold to Majora's Mask being the winner, but I don't feel as though I was able to justify my opinion well enough in such a short period of time. So for today, this episode will be slightly longer as I take another look at The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Let's get started. To start off this battle, I'm going to go over why people think A Link to the Past is the best Zelda game. People across the internet all claim this game perfected the 2D formula, giving credit to its openness and lack of constant advice on what to do or where to go. This game is also given immense praise for its encouragement of exploration, which fans of this game say is missing in newer installments of the series. On top of all of this, the lack of heavy story and overall pacing is what fans praise in this game. They're wrong. I'll start off with explaining the story, or lack thereof. The game starts out with Link hearing Zelda's voice in his head, calling out for help. Then your purple-haired uncle guardian man leaves and tells you to stay put. So, as would be expected of the typical adventuring hero, you completely disregard his advice and follow him. When you sneak into the castle, you encounter him as he's drawing his final breaths. Wait, hold on. We're not even 5 minutes into this game, and already this man of questionable relation to our protagonist is dying in what is supposed to be the scene that drives you forward to save Zelda. But who cares? This means nothing! It doesn't matter! After this, you make your way through the castle and eventually make your way to Zelda. After she delivers her monologue of lore, the two of you escape to the sanctuary. Then, after yet another forced monologue, you're sent to Kakariko Village in order to find the Elder Shashashasha. And then he gives you the quest to find the 3 pendants needed to obtain the Master Sword. Wow, this sure sounds like a story-heavy game to me. And it's not even spread out like most other Zeldas. It's all in huge chunks. Now, what I've said so far may sound trivial, but this just doesn't make sense. Okay, if you say the game has no story, or very little story, what do you call all this? And if you claim this story has a heavy story, then why is it spread out in gigantic chunks? For a game to integrate good story, it should either be constantly present throughout the game or hardly present at all. For example, in the first 2 Zelda games, there was hardly any story at all. Just get things and save the princess. You win. In Ocarina of Time and Skyward Sword, the story is constant and equally distributed, clearly showing the player the difference between story time and exploring time. And before you think, oh, A Link to the Past was the first Zelda game with a story like this, cut us some slack. Just look at how everyone bashes Ocarina of Time! Everything from the gameplay is too slow, the camera is awful, blah, da, blah, da, blah, da, blah. No one cares that Ocarina was the first 3D Zelda, just that it didn't live up to the SNES game they all hold in such high regard. Now, I'm not saying Ocarina is a perfect game. I'm not even saying that it's a good game. I'm just pointing out the double standard that some critics hold these games to. Just because a game is the first to try something doesn't give it an immunity. It can still be bad. Anyway, now we get to talk about all the misdirection this game gives you, and oh boy, there's a lot of it. So strap in, folks, because this one's gonna be a while. Now, after getting your hero quest from Shashashasha, you have the ability to look on your map and see the locations of the 3 pendants and the Master Sword. In the 2 Zelda games preceding this one, there wasn't necessarily a set order of dungeons to complete, and there certainly weren't map markers showing you where you could go. You could beat the dungeon in any order you wanted to, with natural limitations such as toughness of enemies or the lack of a required item, of course. But if you found all the necessary components, you could beat the 5th dungeon before the 1st if you really wanted to. So naturally, after the first 2 games follow the same pattern, when you see these 3 items, clearly unlabeled with any indication as to the order you would collect them in, you would probably think, maybe I can just get whichever pendant I want. And you'd be wrong! There's a specific order in which you need to get the pendants, but the game gives you no indication of this on your map. Why bother showing you the other locations when you can only access the one? And to make it worse, after you get all of these and you get the Master Sword, you enter the Dark World portion of the game, where you now have to rescue the 7 sages. This time, when you open your map, you see numbered locations marking where the sages are trapped. Now, this would probably make you think, well, since these are numbered, and the last set of things I had to get was in a specific order, maybe I have to get these in a specific order. Nope! You're wrong again! Now you have free reign to do whatever you want, whenever you want. You can rescue whoever you want. Want to rescue stage number 6 but haven't rescued stage number 3? Go right ahead! Oh, but you want to get the unmarked pendant before the other unmarked pendant? Too bad! You have to go in a specific order for absolutely no reason. You can't just change the way the game works halfway through. In the first Legend of Zelda, the game stuck with the whole no story, do whatever you want mechanic the whole way through. In Ocarina of Time, the game stuck with the story-heavy linear style gameplay. Why mix them in a poor fashion like this? At least make it good, not some cheap attempt that makes it look like they had no clue what they wanted to do with this game. This would be like if Skyrim let you go through the game normally up until where you got to the point where you encountered the Greybeards, but suddenly made you focus on the main quest. It wouldn't make any sense. And before you go and say, oh, Skyrim's a completely different game, it's open world, so was Zelda! Not as vast, but it was still open world! And it seemed to be that way until you realize you can't, in the worst way possible. Now it's time to move on to another part of misdirection. Dungeon items. As anyone who has played a newer Zelda game knows, the item you get in a dungeon is used against the boss 99% of the time. This concept was mainly implemented in A Link to the Past, but once again, somewhat poorly. For some dungeons, you use the item obtained in that temple. For others, just the sword is necessary. And in one, an item you don't find through normal gameplay is required to beat the boss. Wait, what? Yeah, heard right. For one boss, you have to go discover the location of a hidden cave that contains this necessary item. See, this wouldn't be a problem if the rest of the game was like this. In the original Zelda, there was rarely, if at all, a necessary item located inside a dungeon. Items like bombs and the candle were purchased from shops scattered across the map, some of which were plainly visible and others which were hidden. In A Link to the Past, all items, except for a select few, are in normal dungeons given to you through standard gameplay. I feel like I should clarify my point here a little better. In the original Zelda, exploring was the only thing you could do. There was little to no guidance, so it was up to you to figure out literally everything. Don't know how to beat that really tough enemy? Better figure it out yourself or pay an NPC to tell you. Can't figure out where something is? Better buy a ton of bombs and go crazy on every spot. But that's okay! The game was designed like that! Later, in Ocarina, you follow an incredibly linear path through the game as the story of the hero of time unfolds before you. Wondering where to go next? Don't worry, the game makes sure you know when and where you need to be somewhere. Unable to access an area in a temple? Just look around more. The necessary item is in there. Somewhere. And again, this is okay, because the game is designed to be this way through and through. A Link to the Past has all kinds of design choices thrown into the cooking pot and mixed together to make this game. Some parts are heavy story, some parts are exploration based, but you never know when! You could sit in a temple for hours trying to figure out what to do, not knowing that the key to being is halfway across the map in a hidden cave. You cannot just switch game design whenever it pleases you in a game. It's confusing to the player, which leads to a bad overall experience. A game, generally speaking, should be designed so that anyone can pick it up and beat it. This may be more difficult for some than others, but they should eventually be able to figure out how to beat the game on their own. I feel as though A Link to the Past is not designed in this way. You have to be in the know about how Zelda games typically work to be able to get anywhere in this game. You need to know the secrets beforehand in order to successfully complete this game. If I took some random person who had never even seen a Super Nintendo before and had them play A Link to the Past, they should eventually be able to figure it out. But with the way this game is designed, I feel as though it is highly unlikely. So now that we've analyzed one game in this battle, it's time to have a look at Majora's Mask. Before I get into the details of this game design, I feel as though I should bring light to the production cycle of this game. While this might seem like an odd topic to start with, you'll see my reasoning in just a moment. The year is 1999. Nintendo is reveling in the astounding success that was The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. In Japan, they were hard at work developing their add-on to the Nintendo 64, which was known as the Nintendo 64 Disk Drive. This device was going to be attached to the Nintendo 64 and would read game discs, much like competitor consoles such as the PlayStation. One day, Shigeru Miyamoto, the original creator of The Legend of Zelda, approached Eiji Aonuma, one of the main designers for the Zelda games, and asked him to make an expansion for Ocarina of Time that would be played on the disk drive. This expansion was going to include 2 new temples and possibly a few other items. Aonuma agreed at first, but eventually grew to dislike the project. Though his attempts to convince Miyamoto to allow him to cancel the expansion, a deal was struck. The deal was that if Aonuma could design a brand new Zelda game in 1 year, he would not have to make the expansion. Sure enough, 1 year later, in 2000, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask hit store shelves. This game featured a much darker premise than the previous games. We first see Link as he is wandering through a forest on Epona, searching for his lost friend Navi, when suddenly, Skull Kid attacks him and steals the Ocarina of Time. As Link chases him, he falls down a huge tree and lands before Skull Kid, who transforms into a Deku Scrub before leaving him as he laughs mockingly. After going through a few more rooms, Link meets the Happy Mask salesman, who greets him with the famous quote, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" Through this dialogue, we learn that Skull Kid stole a sacred mask from the Happy Mask salesman known as Majora's Mask, and is using its dark powers to drop the moon on the parallel world of Terminia. Link now has a mere 3 days to stop the moon from falling and defeat Skull Kid. Now, I know that was a lot, but that's the whole plot of Majora's Mask. The game's story premise, while one of the darkest in the series, is somewhat simple, all things considered. There isn't much plot mentioned again until the end of the game, but that's not what makes this game so amazing. The tone, the interaction with the NPCs, the environment, everything about this game comes together to create one of the most perfect experiences a game has to offer. As you can imagine, the premise of the moon falling on the world can be rather dark, and one of the game's overarching themes is loss. Now, when you first enter Clocktown, the central hub, things seem a bit off. People are preparing for a festival. Everyone's going about their lives without a care in the world, and everyone seems, well, happy. Despite the fact that is getting closer with each passing minute. So, why? Well, it's because of the 5 main areas of this game represent what is known as the Kubler-Ross model of grief. The first area you enter is Clocktown. This first area represents the first stage of the cycle, denial. As you go around talking to people, most of them keep going on about the festival that will be taking place in 3 days and how they have to get ready for it, completely ignoring or denying the rumors of the moon falling. The second area you go into the game, Woodfall, represents anger. When you travel through Woodfall and reach the Deku Palace, you meet the Deku King, who is furious at a monkey because he believes that he kidnapped the princess, even going as far as attempting to execute him, when in reality, the king just misunderstood the situation. After conquering Woodfall, Link goes to Snowhead, which represents bargaining. When Link arrives in Goron Village, he finds the village freezing over and discovers that their leader, Darmani, had gone missing. Link is then led by the ghost of Darmani to a tomb, where he reveals that he died trying to brave the mountain in order to save the village. Realizing you have special powers, which refer to the Ocarina of Time and the Lens of Truth, he begs you to revive him, save him, somehow help him save his village. But you can't help him. This leads to the next area and the next stage. After you brave Snowhead and visit Romani Ranch to get your horse, Link travels to the Great Bay, the area representing depression. Here, Link must watch as Mikau, the lead guitarist in a band of Zoras, dies as the result of trying to save the lead singer Lulu's eggs that were stolen by the Gerudo Pirates. When Link meets Lulu, she is too heartbroken to utter a single word. She just stands on the shore, staring off into the sea. But then, Link enters the final stage of the game, Icona Valley, and the final stage of the Kubler-Ross model of grief, acceptance. Icona Valley is all about death. From the ghosts of Composer Brothers, a skeleton army, and Gibdos galore, this place reeks of death. But here, acceptance is found through the Elegy of Emptiness, a literal transcendence in the temple, the stone tower, and through the dungeon's item, the light arrows. On a side note, there is a fascinating theory about this game that Link actually dies in the very beginning, and throughout the game, he goes through the cycle himself. And I think that fits this game and the nature of the grief cycle perfectly. It has been said that the core mechanic of repeating the 3-day cycle, visiting a different area each time, is a perfect metaphor for the model of grief. Sometimes, when you experience loss, it can feel like time isn't moving forward, like you're stuck in one place, just going through the motions day after day, week after week. Majora's Mask does a perfect job at portraying this through its linearity, forcing the player to go through these areas in a specific order before moving on to the next one. See, this is why this game is so amazing! That was just going over the general tone of the game. There's so much more to cover! Next, I'm going to talk about NPCs in regards to both games. Going back to A Link to the Past, unless they were central to the plot, the NPCs were lifeless and boring. It was just a bunch of stereotypical adventurer stuff, nothing memorable at all. I'd be willing to bet that there are a handful, if any, memorable NPCs from A Link to the Past. In an adventure game such as Zelda, especially a story-based game, NPCs are vital to creating the adventurous environment. Now, back to Majora's Mask, the NPCs are some of the most interesting and full-of-life NPCs in any Zelda game to date. While I summarized the main plot of Majora's Mask earlier, there are so many side quests from the NPCs of the world. Early in the game, you get an item called the Bomber's Notebook that lets you keep track of where NPCs are on each of the 3 days and when certain events will occur. I'm not kidding when I say that almost every single NPC has some sort of connection to a larger side quest. Some of the most notable ones are the Cafe and Anju side quest, where you save an entire marriage in 3 days, as well as the Romani Ranch side quests. While on the subject of side quests, they are the single factor that makes this game have better exploration factor than most other Zeldas. The exploration was optional, yet rewarding. You can go through the entire game of Majora's Mask just going through the main quest, only get the required masks, have a great time. But if you take the time to talk to the NPCs, learn about their stories, and reap the rewards, this game is so much better than the standard story mode that's presented to the average player. In order for exploration to be a compelling gameplay factor, it has to be fun. If the exploration isn't fun, it begins to feel like a chore, discouraging players from stepping off the main path and discovering what the world has to offer. In A Link to the Past, there isn't much for the world to offer. Sure, you might find a few rupees, some bombs, some necessary game items, but at the end of the day, the beaten path is the most enjoyable one. In contrast, Majora's Mask offers so much to find in the world of Termina. Despite its somewhat small size, in each area there are so many different events to trigger, characters to meet, art pieces to get, masks to collect. It just really feels like breaking away from the story is worth it. The game doesn't force you to do any of this either, but you want to do it because it's fun. And that is what makes exploration a good feature. In the end, Majora's Mask is simply a better game than A Link to the Past. Is it the best Zelda game? That depends on what you want in a Zelda game. Do you like a meaningful story and compelling characters? Games like Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess will rank high for you. Do you prefer casual gameplay where you can do whatever you want whenever you want? You probably prefer the 2D Zelda games. Do you like trains, rabbits, and uncanny resemblances to Full Metal Alchemist? Then go out and buy Spirit Tracks as soon as you can. And just so you're clear on where I stand on this spectrum, while Majora's Mask is my personal favorite Zelda, Link's Awakening is my second. But with all that out of the way, the winner, once again, is Majora's Mask. So what do you think? Have I convinced you Majora's Mask is the best, or are you still holding out on A Link to the Past? Be sure to let me know what you think by tweeting me at ZTVGoofingOff using the hashtag FaceOff to let me know where you stand. Until then, I'm Kyle Glockner, and thank you for watching this bonus episode of FaceOff.
This program was produced by ZTV at the University of Akron. To find out how you can make Emmy-winning media, visit the UA School of Communication online. ZTV. Make media. Make a difference.